So as you can see, we are live streaming today's panel discussion. So a recording of today's workshop will actually be available online for folks that weren't able to join us this morning. And so I want to ask all of you to pull out your phones right now. And I'm going to be sharing a tweet and a Facebook post. So if you're on Twitter,
I'm gonna have to get hit with this Facebook.
So I am going to be sharing a tweet.
The Facebook.
I'm at EC Diaz de Leon. So a big long name. At EC Diaz de Leon. And if you will retweet that tweet, to let everybody know that this particular workshop and the panel discussion is live, and so folks that are following you on social media, you can also share it on Facebook. So just copy that post and share it on Facebook as well. And so I want to encourage you to share that as wide as possible so that folks can join us online. So my name is Emiliano Diaz de Leon. I'm the Men's Engagement Specialist for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And I will be your panel moderator this morning. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to explore this particular issue at our conference this week. And grateful for who. Hey, Kelsey. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oh no, we're happy. We're happy you could join us. And we are just getting started. So welcome again to freshman orientation. Kind of a fun time on Thursday morning. Engaging college age men 101. So welcome to all of you. Again, my name is Emiliano Diaz de Leon. I am the Men's Engagement Specialist with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault and your moderator for today's panel. And our panelists will discuss the role that college-age men can play in sexual violence prevention on campus. And these experts will present various approaches to identifying and engaging college men, strategies for navigating university systems in order to maximize effectiveness and sustainability. Participants will have an opportunity to develop comprehensive programming that they can utilize in their local college-based work. So hopefully you will all leave with sort of a better, some additional tools that you can use to think about how to engage college-age men in your community. So we're really grateful to our panelists this morning. We're grateful that Kelsey's able to join us all the way from San Marcos. And we're also grateful that Aaron could make it all the way from Austin and Kenneth all the way from Lubbock. And so I want to take an opportunity to introduce them this morning. And I want to start with, let me start with Kelsey, who's on our screen. Pull up her bio. I'm doing everything by phone, so this is pretty tech savvy this morning. All right, Kelsey, you ready for your introduction?
I'm ready.
Kelsey Banton is a health promotion specialist and advisor to the Men Against Violence, or MAV, at Texas State University. She received her undergraduate degree in psychology from Texas Tech University. She has been working to end gender-based violence since 2006 and started professionally as an anti-violence educator in 2008. She collaborates with students, professionals, and organizations on campus to help create a culture free of sexual violence. She was invited in 2010 to sit on the Texas Primary Prevention Planning Committee to help create and implement sexual assault prevention strategies across the state. So please join me in welcoming Kelsey to our panel. Kelsey, you can't see the beautiful people in the audience, but I hope you heard the clap for you.
I did.
Good. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you.
And then, no, go ahead. What are you gonna say?
Oh no, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We have to give Kelsey a minute. She's sure she's hearing us, and then she's going to respond. And then to my right is my good friend and colleague, Erin Burrows, who develops and implements prevention strategies of interpersonal violence in collaboration with the University of Texas at Austin. Erin serves as the Prevention and Outreach Specialist in the Counseling and Mental Health Center, overseeing Voices Against Violence programming, program communications, campaigns, events, and resource development. She also serves as the staff advisor to the Voices Against Violence sponsored student organization and co-chairs Be Vocal, the bystander intervention initiative of UT Austin. Erin has been working in intimate partner violence prevention and intervention since 2005 as a student organizer in the professional and education community mobilization and direct service for survivors. So please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming Erin. It's a little early. And last but not least, can we pull up Kenneth's bio? So Kenneth, we're really grateful that you can join us today. It's just taking a minute to pull up your bios here. Let's see, Kenneth, where are you? It's in my email somewhere. Oh man, that's not good. I was on the road too. I was like, this is going so well. There you are, Kenneth. All right. Kenneth Castillo is the founder and director of South Plains Men Challenging Men, and he is a member of the Lubbock Human Rescue Coalition and the primary prevention specialist for Voice of Hope in Lubbock, the Lubbock Rape Crisis Center. Kenneth has been a volunteer for Voices of Hope since 2002. In that time, he has seen and heard victim blaming when it came to sexual assault. Women's organizations are telling women how to protect themselves when they go out, but there were not any men's organizations that were telling men and boys not to rape, telling them what a healthy relationship is and what consent is. And that is the reason he started South Plains Men Challenging Men. So we're really grateful. Join me in welcoming Kenneth. That went smoothly well. Thank you all for being with us this morning. I know it's early, but we really appreciate your participation. Everyone on your table has these blue Post-its that I want to encourage you during today's panel. At the end of today's panel, we will invite the audience to pose questions. And so I want to ask you to write down your questions throughout today's discussion. And if you could post them in the back before we get to that section. So you can either wait for that at that point, and then I will sort of take a look at the questions that we have and see how much time we have available. And we'll pose those questions to our panel. So it's not necessarily necessary for you to put your name on the questions, but we want to give you an opportunity to ask questions of the individual panelists or to ask questions specifically about strategies that they mentioned or sort of general questions that you might have around engaging college-age men, because we're very fortunate to have such a wealth of experience with us this morning. So we also have, they each have received a set of questions that I'm going to ask, and we're going to start with Kelsey. So the first question is, in your opinion, why is it important to engage college-age men in sexual violence prevention?
I think it's vital that we ourselves in anti-violence. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're going in and out, but we're getting the gist of it.
Okay. Because I can kind of hear so yeah, I think it's really important for and a lot of that men being able to talk about anti-violence really effective. Really talking about that we understand.
Yes, I can't understand anything she's saying.
I'm really struggling with this.
Hey, Kelsey? Do you have a microphone headphone set that you can use?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that might help. And it's probably our internet, so I apologize. You're going in and out, and so it's difficult for us to understand. So let me give you some time to set that up, and we'll come back to you. So I apologize.
Okay.
It's probably the internet. Like, you sound great right there. But maybe the microphone might help a little bit. Because we're using wireless and internet here, and so that might be the issue. So we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, you sound great there. So Erin,
Sure.
in your opinion, why is it important to engage college-age men in sexual violence prevention?
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I was a little bit nervous about turnout this morning, so this is incredible and extremely hopeful to me. But this is a direction that a lot of people are thinking about going in. I've been at the University of Texas at Austin for about 4 years, or just over 4 years at this point. And in my time there, as I'm sure most of you have experienced in your work, mostly it was women or feminine people attending events, coming to meetings on their own time. Occasionally there would be a few dedicated young men, but for the most part, it was women organizing on behalf of this issue to prevent sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking on campus. And so we tried a few different experiments over the years to engage men intentionally. I'll talk about the strategy that we landed on a little bit later, but in terms of its importance, what I usually tell young people when I'm tabling or talking about it is that most violence is committed by men, but most men are not violent. And I think that really resonates with especially young men who are trying to figure out what their role is and how to be part of a movement to prevent and respond to interpersonal violence. This idea that that men are not necessarily the subject of attacks, they're not being demonized in our work. We're not trying to scapegoat this issue, because certainly everyone has a role and a stake in preventing interpersonal violence. But when we do zoom out a little bit and we look at the realities of the demographics of who is committing violence, who's responsible for violence, most of those people are male identified, are men. And yet when we again look at those statistics with a little more scrutiny and detail, we know that most men as a group are not violent people. And so what is that gap? What does that say about gender in our culture and our society, how we're raised, our expectations of what it means to be a man, and specifically a young man on a college campus where we know risk is so much higher for experiencing these issues. So that's my kind of blanket statement about why this is so important.
Thank you.
Well, these young men are our future leaders. They are going to have lives. They are going to grow up and teach their kids how to be men. Also, college age guys these days are hit with social media pressure, big time. I mean, they see their friends posting their sexual conquests on Facebook, on Twitter, on all these other different media outlets, and they feel that they need to go do the same thing to be a man. And I feel we need to engage these guys to have them understand what it really is to be a man. Because there are a lot of guys out there, a lot of older guys out there that really don't even know what it is to be a man. And we have to engage these guys because, like I said, they are our future leaders. They're going to be our next president. They're going to be our next governors.
Thank you. Kelsey, let's try you again.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, so much
Yes.
better. We love to hear your voice. See your face.
Excellent. Okay. So I'll just very much kind of mirror what the other two people on the panel said. Oftentimes when I do this work, I do start out that men are largely the ones who are committing this violence, and kind of like Erin was saying, it is a very, very small percentage. And I think that speaks to the importance of there's a lot of that social norming that happens within male spaces, that you have the large majority of men not committing these crimes, but also and perpetuating it. But also, how is the behavior is able to continue. And I think that one of the most powerful things we can do is men being able to talk about violence work and doing the family violence work, seeing themselves reflected in that. With Men Against Violence, something that I found to be extremely powerful is most of the men who come into the space for the very first time, who come to the meetings, they will almost always say, I came because I saw one of my peers talking about this in orientation or talking about this in class, and it really resonated with me, and I just want to know more about it. Oftentimes, the time that they've heard not only a peer but a male talk about interpersonal violence and talking about masculinity and talking about preventing it. And so I think that reflection and seeing themselves in those spaces is incredibly vital for this work.
Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate that. So I think I wanted to move on to the next question, which I think gets to something that I hear a lot from the field in terms of sort of our go-to group of men on colleges and universities. And so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about what is the role of fraternities, if any, in our prevention efforts. So I think a lot of folks, sort of that's our go-to group of men on colleges and universities. So I'm curious to hear what Charles' thoughts are about fraternities and engaging them.
Oh, okay, sure. We need to look at them as allies, very much so. Let's be clear. I mean, not every guy in the fraternity is a rapist. But with that being said, frat members are 3 times more likely to rape, according to a Time article I read in a couple of years ago. The fraternities, they provide leadership opportunities to these guys. And like I said, I mean, these guys are going to be our leaders. They give a real world example of how to work in a group for a common goal. And I think we can use them as an ally to combat sexual violence. And instead of preaching down to them and making them feel bad for being in the fraternity, we need to look at them as allies and identify those strengths and build upon that and create a community.
Thank you, Kenneth. So speaking of that, have you had any successes, Kenneth, specifically with men who are part of fraternities?
Not yet.
I'm just curious about that. I mean, I think a lot of folks, share your views about that, but they haven't had a lot of successes, or they can look to experiences with engaging those men. So I was curious about that, but I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, no, not yet. I look forward to it, and I mean, you just got to keep on trying. Eventually, one day, hopefully soon, I'll be able to get into maybe even just one of them. But you just got to keep trying. Eventually, you'll get through. I think with the fraternities, hearing the message from a guy is a lot different than them hearing a message from a lady. And I feel that I can definitely do that. Trying hard as I can to get into at least maybe one fraternity to try to talk to them.
When you do, let us know how it goes.
Yeah, definitely.
Erin.
Yeah, I can talk about my experience with that. And similar that I walked in to my role, I went to a very small liberal arts school myself, so there were no fraternal organizations, there was no major sports culture. So it was a major learning curve for me across the board and working in a large university. And so learning about sorority and fraternity life, learning about the history of those organizations, their values, the differences between the organizations, I think has really helped. And really having a very strong relationship with the coordinators of sorority and fraternity life at the UT Austin campus has been really instrumental. So that's one suggestion I have, is to really befriend the people who are closest to those organizations and to really avoid this blanket terminology. Even the word frat guy can be offensive to some fraternity men. And I've learned that the hard way, right? And so just really understanding it as a microculture, like you would understand any other cultural competencies as a worker in this field, I think is very helpful. And the other thing that I've learned across different student populations is to really seek out that organic student leadership and the excitement that some student leaders have around being innovators and leaders and founders of campaigns around this issue. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned at UT Austin. Specifically in the culture of UT Austin, people want to be the first to do something. And so when you go in with a prepackaged program and you're like, just do this workshop for your guys, like just let me come in and give my 50-minute spiel so that I can check off my box and you can check off your risk management box. That's not really going to shift culture, right? It might make you feel good at the end of the year when you can say that you've reached that one particular organization. And certainly we have had moments like that at our institution. We have a really incredible interactive theater program. And some fraternities have invited that program in for an interactive performance around negotiating consent. So really proud and excited about those ongoing relationships. But really, it's been these moments of organic student leadership that feel transformative. So an example of that came up last spring is a campaign called Not on My Campus, which actually started at TCU, and there were friends who were attending UT Austin. And so they took this campaign and adapted it for our university, and I worked as a non-official advisor, sat down with them a few times to talk about the issue, talk about rape culture in particular. And so the campaign was to write Not on My Campus on your hand, take a selfie, and then sign an online Google pledge. And thousands of sorority and fraternity members participated in that campaign. If you look at the hashtag Not on My Campus UT, you'll see a lot of different men's groups were participating. Of course, if you're working from a prevention perspective, you know that this is not prevention, right? But it is one step towards that. It's about shifting the resistance to prevention-based programming by getting that hook, that buy-in, that ownership around the issue. So I've seen that group fluctuate, right? Because it's a pretty easy task to take a selfie, right? Like there's something really ubiquitous about that, about being able to claim being part of a movement by doing this one action online. But I have seen growth in that organization to push it to the next level. So they did a campaign this fall called Knowledge on My Campus, really making sure that members of sorority and fraternity life knew about resources. You know, everybody goes through orientation, but not everybody absorbs this content about where to go when your friend has been sexually assaulted or you're worried about a friend in a harmful relationship. So we started with that awareness-based campaign, and now they've kicked it up a notch. So try not to be too frustrated when you notice that maybe something is at a level where it's not capital P prevention work, but it does open that door is another piece of feedback I would give. And certainly I had my own process around all of this, right? Because the campaign was so successful. It was more successful than anything I had ever done through my office of Voices Against Violence. And so just seeing the power, the level of networking that these organizations have on campus can be very eye-opening. The president of the university participated in their campaign last spring, which was incredible to see that level of support from the highest, you know, the tower at UT Austin, right? And because it was a student-led movement, the administration responded very differently to that campaign. So I do encourage people to find those leaders who want to be the founders of movements like this on your campus, because I think it makes a huge difference to be able to claim that they're the ones that came up with this, that they're leading it, and that you are serving as a support person for those ideas and those mobilizations.
So Aaron, where can folks learn more about the campaign?
Sure. So they are very organized. They've actually created a campaign organizing guide for other campuses. So it didn't start at UT Austin, but they have been inspiring other campuses. They have a Gmail account that they check and respond to. It was truly a student-led movement. So you can just Google Not on My Campus UT and their contact information will come up.
And they've gotten some national publicity in terms of national news coverage.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a lot of really wonderful articles in there about the campaign. And so,
and they're planning another big push this spring. And so
they're also on Instagram, correct?
They're everywhere. They're all over social media.
All over social media. So
yes.
Yeah, please check them out.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Absolutely.
Kelsey?
My turn.
Your turn.
My turn. I'm ready. So I will preface this conversation with two things. One, I came from a rape crisis center space where primary prevention was how you kind of started and ended all of things. And that was helpful for me and that worked. And then moving into a university level program, I very much mirror what Erin was talking about of like, I have been really struggling and really kind of doing my own process around what do those smaller steps look like. There are lots of ways in which I feel successful, and it's definitely not in a primary prevention space. It's successful because I was and I was in the door. And so there's a lot of process around that, especially when you're talking about groups like fraternities in that space. And when you're talking about both of those groups, I think it's important to recognize that they're not homogeneous. They're not all the same. Just like when you engage men in general, it's not a homogeneous group. So African American fraternities, multicultural fraternities, they have much lower rates of sexual assault than what studies show us about mostly white, kind of more economically entitled fraternities. And I think that's also very important because, again, you have to talk about that allyship and where you're getting that allyship. Something that's been really helpful for me and something that I found successful is, again, looking at where fraternities, kind of what Erin was saying, is where fraternities, where do you see those natural leaders and where can you get in spaces where it feels like that conversation can be back and forth and it's not forced. So something that happened recently was I was doing a presentation for a group of leaders that were broad and came from lots of different backgrounds. And as I was getting demographics in the space, it turns out there were 8 or 9 fraternity members in the room who had actually seen me present before. They had invited me to their chapter for a one-time presentation. And after the presentation I did for this kind of diverse group of leaders, 2 of those members kind of came up and were asking about, as men, what can we do? What is our role? Which we had talked about a little in the presentation, but we wanted to take it further. And for me, that was a successful moment of really trying to engage them. And I mean, they were already engaged and really trying to taking that's what they wanted to do, and that they wanted more information and they wanted to bring something more to their chapter. And so really trying to find those individuals that are highly motivated and are leaders, because clearly they were leaders in different spaces, not only within their fraternity. And so hopefully I'll be able, my office and Men Against Violence will be able to tap into that and really see if they would like to be a part of any of the April things we have going on and kind of go from there. So it is about finding those organic spaces and really having that dialogue and it not being forced. And that can be really hard on a college campus, and that can be really hard with fraternities and athletes because the population sometimes is just harder to get into.
So Kelsey, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about Men Against Violence. I think folks heard that in your introduction, but I think it would be helpful, sort of the context of the organization there at Texas State University.
Yeah, absolutely. So Men Against Violence is a national chapter that was started, I believe, in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, if I'm not mistaken. And in 1990, 7, they actually started a chapter here at Texas State. So my boss, Julie Eckert, is the one who started it. And it originally had kind of the normal format in which Men Against Violence was kind of founded on, was it had different leaders of males coming together and doing kind of one-time presentations around interpersonal violence. So there were athletes and there were fraternities and there were student government people kind of in that space. At Texas State specifically, there was a lull. And so after about 4 or 5 years, the chapter became pretty inactive. And then about 3.5 years ago, Julie again started kind of asking around and talking to people and seeing if anyone would be interested in starting. And there were 3 men, Javier Reveles, Elliot, and give me a second. I just went blank. Elliot and Sean Quinones, and they've been with us since their freshman, sophomore year, and actually they're all about to be graduating out. But these 3 gentlemen, these 3 men, were the ones who've been doing a lot of that groundwork. They've been doing orientation, they've been doing presentations, and now our membership. So 3 years later, our membership is up to about 12. And we have ebbs and flows with membership. I think there's a question in here about barriers that we were going to talk about, and kind of what that looks like with engaging men. Our organization is open to anyone of any gender identity, but as of right now, it is still called Men Against Violence. I will say that's a barrier in of itself to some extent, but the work that Men Against Violence does, so we have about 5 people who identify as female in the organization, but all of the members become trained and do presentations around hate crimes, around consent, around healthy relationships. And they do those in freshman classes, and they do that at orientation as well.
So Kelsey, where can folks learn more about Men Against Violence?
Absolutely. So if you go to our website, so at Texas State Student Health Center, there's actually a health promotions tab, and if you hit the health promotion tab, Men Against Violence page will come up, and you can learn all about kind of the content that we deliver and how we deliver that. We do about 400 presentations to students in the fall alone, and the members of Men Against Violence do roughly about like 40 to 50% of that. So they're very active, they're very engaged. The programming is something that they enjoy, and so in terms of doing programming and getting out and being in front of students and peers, seeing other peers talk about that, I think that they do a very good job, and it's very successful. And we also have a Facebook page as well.
Thank you. So I think as folks are sitting in the room, sort of thinking about how do I get started with my local college and university, whether it's a private school or a statewide school or university. One of the things that I was curious about, and we'll start with Aaron, what is the role of college institutions, right? Encourage mental model healthy masculinity. So when we're looking for potential partners on college campuses around the state, what are some of the institutions that exist at UT of Austin that you feel like sort of encourage healthy masculinity?
That is a complicated question, I think. And I wish I had a straightforward answer. But I don't know if there is one particular one that I would point out over another. I think this is an issue that needs work in all departments and all areas. I'll talk a little bit about the strategy that we've used at UT Austin. Is there anyone here who's actually on a college campus? Okay, a few people, great. Because this will be in particularly useful for you. If you're outside agency working with a college, this might apply if you find someone who's kind of on the ground and working with folks on that campus. So I think I mentioned earlier, we had a couple events or campaigns where we were focusing on men and masculinities, men's role in the movement. Some of those totally flopped, and I can talk about some of those disasters so you don't repeat what I did, some of those hard lessons learned. Some of them were pretty good, but mostly it was people showing up who already cared, who are already engaged, who already understood what the dynamics were about. It wasn't really reaching people who most probably needed to have the conversation. I think many people in the movement can relate to that, right? You throw Take Back the Night, and the people who already care are the ones who show up. So we were having panel discussions, Emiliano and I partnered for one of those, which was incredibly successful, right? It feels good as a worker, but I know that it's not actually moving the needle that far. And so our strategy in terms of implementing some sustainable programming at UT Austin was actually to work with faculty first. Faculty are revered. Faculty are probably most respected people on our campus. they're heard, they're listened to. When faculty members say something, students absorb it because that's actually their role all the time on campus, right? And so what we did was identify faculty members who were already experts in identity development and masculinities, and pulled those people together into a steering committee. We were really careful about how much we asked of them, because they're also probably the busiest people on campus. And at a research institution, they're certainly very busy people, right? They're working on their own books, they're working on their own labs and research agendas. So we were very intentional about just asking them for biannual luncheons, where we would prep a lot of content and basically ask for their input and their approval at those luncheons. And so through that, one of those faculty members actually came up with the name of the initiative, the project, Masculine UT. So building in some pride, some university pride there, Masculine UT. And I'll show you some stuff that we've done. This was our launch event with Dr. Michael Mesner. And he had just put out this book, Some Men, Feminist Allies in the Movement to End Violence Against Women. Has anyone read that book in this space? Highly recommended. Really talking about the fact that this is not new work, that men have been engaged in the movement to end violence against women since the 60s and early 70s. And so this book really documents different generations of men doing this work. For me, in reading the book and speaking with Dr. Messner and this event panel that we had, it was truly illuminating this, this concept or this realization that actually this is really old thinking. And every generation, it seems like we remember that men need to be centered in some ways in our prevention efforts. So this room, this event, I was actually very shocked because it's an academic event about a book, and the room was packed. There was standing room only. So it made me realize that we were really hitting a nerve on our campus, that people were hungry to talk about this and hungry to talk about it from an academic perspective. So one of our requests was that each of our faculty members, steering committee members, if they had the capacity, if they were interested, some did decline, would host an event last semester. And we had incredible success with that. One was a screening of The Mask You Live In, which is a really wonderful documentary, highly recommended. It's an easy tool to implement on your campus. They basically do all the work for you. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, so it's a relatively long documentary, but truly, and other people can speak to this if you've seen it, I think emotionally riveting, very nuanced and in-depth, multiracial, so really representing a lot of different kinds of masculinities. And that is actually one of the core interventions of the project that we've landed on, is to pluralize healthy masculinities, to really talk about what are different facets of healthy masculinities that are not singular or monolithic. So then you have the opportunity, when you pluralize masculinities, to bring in race, to bring in class, to bring in gender identity or gender expression, to bring in sexuality. And even that intervention, just talking about that in a room, you can fill up an hour of content with what does that look like for the people in that space, for people of all genders, right? So how did the different men in your life show you different aspects of healthy masculinities? There you go, right? That question alone can fill a lot of time. So I can talk a little bit more about where we're at with the project, but I want to pause in case other people also have thoughts around where in your institution healthy masculinities live. And for us, the answer was in our faculty experts.
Thank you.
Just like she said, I mean, I've had quite a few different male faculty supporters, not only at Texas Tech, but also at South Plains College and Lubbock Christian University as well. I was wrestling with this last night. I even had to ask Emiliano probably around 10 o'clock last night. I was like, man, this is the last question I have, and I really can't think of any healthy institutions on Tech campus that model healthy masculinity. But then I started thinking, you know what, the Student Government Association for sure. The Student Government Association, faith-based organizations that live on campus, such as the Wesleys, Chi Alpha, and then like the Catholic student organizations. The reason that they are that they model healthy masculinity is because, I mean, they're held accountable. These guys are held accountable, and started thinking about that a little bit more. And I mean, a lot of these guys that are the problem, I mean, they really have not ever been held accountable before. And it's just got them in trouble. But these guys, other than that, I really couldn't think of any of the other ones that model healthy masculinity.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was my intention, just because it is a difficult question to answer. I do want to encourage folks, and I see that folks are sharing on social media. I want to encourage you to continue doing that and use hashtag, and I failed to mention it this morning, hashtag TAASA Conference 2016, but now you know it. But please continue sharing. And so, Kelsey, your thoughts about this particular question. I'm curious to hear what you have your thoughts about this.
I also struggled with this question, and I think that's because I'm relatively new to this institution, and that's important to say. I spent the last year doing community mapping within my institution and trying to find those pockets of allies and what that looks like. I think it's also difficult, and why I think all three of us have struggled with this is because there really is a kind of gap when we talk about what's a spaces to engage men, and what does that help in that? What does that look like on communication from a CSR perspective? And that is hard to find, I think. Definitely the organization that I advise is one of those spaces. It's a space where people come and talk about their experiences and do those counter stories and really have a vulnerable space to have those conversations. Another office that does this well is the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and they actually have implemented something called First Fridays, and it is a space where for men that they can come, and each month they choose kind of a new topic, and oftentimes it is around identity, and it's around how diverse and how complex masculinity is, and how, depending on your culture and how you identify and what all that looks like, it's not gonna be the same. So they've created this space that some of our members go to as well, and they've created this space where these people who identify as male are able to again be vulnerable and talk about their experiences and have counter stories and just hear other people who identify as male really have conversations about what they're going through and how they're struggling and their successes, and when they do have those successes around their identity and masculinity. So that office in particular, I think, is doing a great job. And I'll say that I still am kind of looking and doing that community mapping and trying to find other spaces where that is being reinforced. And it's not even always a top-down issue, but where does it feel like it's happening more naturally, just in different spaces? And I'm still kind of looking and searching for maybe where that is. So again, to kind of tap into that and become allies and kind of align the work that we're doing. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Chelsea, one of the things that you mentioned is this process of community mapping that you're doing. Could you share a little bit with us about how you're doing that kind of community mapping, how you're conducting that? I think that might be of interest to folks in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I am trying to do is I'm trying to, institutions are somewhat new just in terms, even within, I think it was interesting, if we go back to fraternity, learning that there are different fraternities and they have different networks and they don't all think the same and do the same and they have different goals even. That was something that I knew kind of that as an outlier, but I didn't really understand what it meant to kind of be a part of these different groups and what it meant to them. So I've just been doing a lot of listening. I have an advantage in that I'm already on the university, so sometimes that I can get the meeting. I will say that Aaron mentioned something very important, and that when you do the ask is that you potentially are asking to not take a lot of their time. It feels very similar to how we did in the community. Everyone is busy. So I've been trying to set up 15, 20-minute, this is who I am, this is something that I would like to do, and I usually have a very specific project or goal that I like to talk about with a particular group, and just kind of talk about, is there any way for me to get in front of the audience that I want to get in front of if they're in charge of that, or just to continue maybe to have another meeting, or if there's another person I need to have a meeting with. It's just a lot of me kind of sitting down and really mapping out departments and figuring out who is the person in that department that is going to be most helpful to me and what I want to accomplish. And on some level, potentially who's already doing this work in some way. How is it parallel to the work that I'm doing? So one of the people in the Office of Disability and Inclusion, they do a lot of work with first generation men, and a big part of that is retention and trying to keep those men to graduate. And that's aligned in my work, and really talking about, like, how does the work that I'm trying to do align with the fact that first generation males coming to college have more barriers in front of them, and those barriers are often culture related, potentially racially motivated, and so really trying to figure out, like, where does that partnership exist.
Thank you, Kelsey. I really appreciate that. So one of the things that we haven't done yet, and that I think want to make sure that we take an opportunity to sort of share some of the successes that you've had in engaging them. So on your college campus. So we're going to start with Kenneth, and I'm curious to hear some of the successes that you've had at those local colleges and universities in your area.
Well, one of the another one of the organizations that has really helped me out a lot on campus is the Tech Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance. I joined their organization last semester just to see what kind of support they had from the male population, and I was shocked to see. I mean, I was expecting I was going to be the only guy in the meeting, and there's 3 times as many people there. There were 3 of us there, and I was very encouraged. But they helped me get a room last January to kick off the White Ribbon campaign. If anybody does not know what the White Ribbon stands for, it's the White Ribbon is for guys. You take a pledge not to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. And I had them sign a banner that had the pledge on it, and then we gave them the white ribbon, and they were able to get me a theater inside the student union building to have our white ribbon campaign. And I would say it was a success. The year before, it was our first year to have the white ribbon campaign, and we had maybe 2 handfuls of people that showed up, and this time we had maybe about 25 people show up. We had a panel discussion with an ER physician, what else was there? Women's Protective Services, a male faculty, and a male undergrad. All these guys were on this panel, and it was a really good panel. We also brought in Darren Dorsey from Texas Council Against Family Violence. Is that right? Yeah. And we also showed a short video of Tony Porter, and it was a success. I was amazed, and we were really excited about that. And our White Ribbon campaign goes from January all the way until October, and we have all kinds of different events going on with the help of these women's organizations, like the Women's Studies Program, have been very supportive of what I've been doing on a volunteer capacity. I have to admit that. I mean, I've been doing this volunteer for the last couple of years now, and the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance been following on their footsteps. They're going to do the Take Back the Night in April 21st, I believe, and we're going to be there as well. I'm going to have our guys. We're going to meet up at the end of this month, and we're going to make posters for this event and be visible. Our posters are going to say, "Our strength is not for hurting." Because when she said that she was too drunk, I said that we shouldn't. And we're going to be following them and walk alongside them in their march. getting my name out there, getting your name out there, getting your organization's name out there as soon as you start it, that is key. I mean, if nobody knows who you are or what you're doing, you're not going to have any support at all. And I've been very excited this semester. I've been all over the paper, whether it's been Human Rescue Coalition, whether it's been South Plains Men Challenging Men, or what else? What else have and also just being part of FMLA, just getting your name out there. That's key.
And I would say, as somebody who's been following your work for the last couple of years, specifically South Plains Men and the White Ribbon Campaign event, I think you guys have a really strong social media presence. I think that really makes a difference in terms of reaching and engaging men, both online as well as sort of in person, sort of getting them to participate in those events. I would definitely encourage you, if you're not already following them on Facebook, sort of to go back and look at the pictures from the White Ribbon Campaign event on campus. I think it's just really powerful, and I really wanted to be a part of that event this year, but wasn't able to. But I'm glad that my colleague Darren was able to be part of that event for the Texas Council of Family Violence. So we're going to switch it up this time. So instead of having Aaron go next, we're going to have Kelsey go next. So Kelsey, what are some of the successes that you've had, whether Men Against Violence has had or that you've had in sort of engaging men on campus?
So speaking for Men Against Violence, I definitely think we had a lot of success in just increasing our membership. There are a lot of barriers to, I think, in an organization sometimes, that when you're talking about time, when you're talking about all the things that students could be doing, getting students to come to students at 5 o'clock every Monday, that in itself is a barrier. So again, our membership is up, and I think that's really successful, and I think that speaks to the dedication of the members and how well that the members have really been using their own social circles to really engage other men, engage other individuals around this issue. We have multiple members in Men Against Violence who are very savvy and very smart, and kind of use those social networks that they have to try to do that recruiting and get people to even come to a meeting. In terms of other places successful, we, again, so not really with primary prevention specific, but we did last year we did a Take Back the Night event, and we had Ebony Stewart come out and do some poetry readings, and had students also be able to come up to the mic and share their own experiences. And it was, in my opinion, very, very successful. We had probably about 30 or 40 students that shared their own experiences and came up, and a lot of men in that space were able to come up and speak. And it wasn't just people who had potentially experienced sexual assault themselves, but also there were people who came up and also talked about what it felt like to witness those things, to be in a space where that sexual assault, that domestic violence, domestic violence had happened. And so just hearing other students, Ebony Stewart is amazing. She does amazing work, and so having her in that space as well and being able to facilitate that was a very powerful thing for the university. And it had been a very long time since the university had done a Take Back the Night event or a large event of that, kind of on that scale. So I was really proud of that. Another success that I think a lot of people in the room potentially will also be able to have is really using Title IX and taking Title IX and potentially getting them in the door with it. And that's been something that's been helpful for myself. There is an expectation that when you do Title IX, you just do policy, you talk about policy, you talk about consequences. I spend nights on that, and I get an hour and a half in front of audiences, and the goal of the presentation is to really, when I do the presentation, is to talk about gender and race culture and kind of gender identity and what that looks like on our college campus specifically, and really understanding the climate of our college campus. And hopefully it's also kind of a hook for other students in that space to be in different spaces. And also, I spend a lot of time in the presentation really talking about what are some of the other spaces that you occupy, what are some of the other spaces that you're in that you would want to have this conversation, that you're interested in potentially elaborating, talking about what you see happening on your college campus. And that's been successful to the extent that the groups that I'm allowed to get in front of are the groups that talk a lot. So fraternities and athletes have been a group that I've been allowed to have access to, as well as student government and student foundation. And so all of those groups, because of their leadership, because they're social hubs, again, they're one-time presentations. So tricky in terms of how we measure that success. Are successful always in that potentially I'm being invited into different spaces and more spaces.
Thank you, Kelsey. So Erin, ready for your...
Yeah, I'm trying to think, organize some thoughts around this. And one that I think will be useful for everybody in this room is a campaign that we started a few years ago to build up and to promote our Survivors Emergency Fund. So when we started the campaign, the fund was already in existence. It's a privately held fund coordinated by the Counseling and Mental Health Center. The fund is accessed by our advocates and counselors for expenses related to interpersonal violence. And it's been used over the years for a wide variety of things, from replacing cell phones that were damaged during a violent incident, to replacing locks, to helping students move into new apartments, even for some students buying new mattresses and pots and pans, depending on the severity of their circumstances. And for anyone who's worked with trying to get financial, practical resources to students, you know the barriers around that and how incredibly exhausting and frustrating it can be to work with some of other funding sources. I will not name names at this moment, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And so to have a private fund where the control is really in the counseling experts' hands to determine what the need is has been incredible. In our system, we don't require any traditional evidence, so a student does not have to report to police or to the university to access those funds. They need to be a client of the counseling center, which is a completely confidential space on our campus. So there's a number of reasons why I'm all about this fund. I think it says to our students that we believe them, and we believe them to the degree that they should not be paying out of pocket for any expense related to what happened to them, including medical bills, lawyers' expenses. Of course, there's many free lawyer services, so that one shouldn't be as much of a problem. So thinking about our campus, thinking about students, thinking about what motivates students on a large university, philanthropy is something that came up over and over and over again. And so I took that idea, and again, this idea of how do you open up doors? How do you get the conversation started? How do you get buy-in from these large, well-established student groups? And we started a campaign. The first iteration was called Be an Anchor. We're using the metaphor of the anchor as a supportive responder. There's a book called Helping Her Get Free, if anyone's familiar with this, and they use this metaphor for the person who isn't trying to control the situation or distance themselves from the situation, but is that supportive, ongoing person in someone's life. So we used that metaphor and we ran with it, and we recruited registered student organizations. There was an official relationship with the university that helped a lot. And then they were given an info session about fundraising guidelines, including making sure that whatever fundraising event that they're putting on really aligned with the goals and the values of our program. So we had conversations on the front end that maybe not a date auction, right? Maybe not a bikini car wash, but you could do practically anything else to really bring in your creativity and what you already do as a student org, and then think about adding this fundraising component to it. So it could be as simple as passing around a bucket for spare change at your regular meetings. It could be a huge blowout event. And students really did do the full range. I got donations from $4 to $4,000 the first year that we ran this campaign. So we've been able to raise about $10,000 every year, and many of our organizations are men's organizations. So one in particular is called the TAASA Club. They are a very well-established organization on our campus. They hold what they call Thursday coffee nights in their house, where they'll bring in speakers, and the rooms are packed. And then after that, they'll sometimes have a fundraiser or an event. So the first year that we held this fundraising campaign, they had macaroni and cheese night, and they sold this disgusting sandwich called the Mac Brown. At the time, Mac Brown was our football coach still. So it was a macaroni and cheese sandwich. This is something I would never in my life come up with. So really, again, pulling from student ingenuity, their creativity. Apparently these things sold really fast, the mac and cheese sandwich. And so it's also about bringing in some lightheartedness and some fun around their engagement with this program. And that is a really tricky thing to do. But relying on their creativity when they know will mobilize students really helps. This past year, we changed the name of the campaign to the Support Campaign, mostly because we were tired of talking about anchors and like describing that whole metaphor. I would suggest you skip that part and just call it something more straightforward if you decide to do something similar on your campus. And so we, this year, got in touch with the Texas Blazers, which is another one of our well-established, well-known, well-respected men's organizations on campus. And they really took it to the next level. Because we had launched this Healthy Masculinities project, they were really excited and interested in that. But as I was talking about earlier, there's something on our campus about ownership and being the first to do something that is really salient and meaningful. So they decided to name their campaign something else, which was Men Can End. And so if you look at the hashtag Men Can End, you'll see some of their work that they did this past fall. So they held a series of events, including a screening of the mosque you live in. They sold what they called cheap lunch, which is just like selling hot dogs on one of our main drags on campus, but talking about the fact that it's going to Voices Against Violence, promoting our program while they're doing something not totally related to this issue, right? But just putting the word out there. They held a resource fair, which was really well populated, and organized the thing with our community agencies. So really incredible organic student leadership, again, showing up. And then finally, they held this gala fundraising dinner. So they had an online fundraising campaign and then brought our Vice President of Student Affairs as the keynote speaker, a number of other poets and speakers to a really wonderfully well-catered, well-organized gala dinner. And they raised almost $5,000 through all of their efforts on campus, while including this messaging about men's engagement and men's prevention work on campus. So it started as an awareness campaign, started as fundraising, and it has evolved to some groups choosing to take it to the next level and really talk about masculinities and men's roles in the movement. So if you're interested in more information about the fund or this particular fundraising campaign, please do get in touch, because it has certainly been one of the biggest successes on our campus. And I think it's, I think we're going to talk about barriers in a moment, but it's a lower risk way to get men involved. Fundraising for something that feels practical and concrete, I think, is something that a lot of young people can wrap their heads around, as it's useful. I'm directly putting resources into somebody's hand who's been hurt, and then helping them to stay in school. So I'll stop there because I think that was a lot of information. But it is definitely something I would highly recommend for any higher education institution to consider taking on.
Thank you. So I want to take a moment to collect the questions that you have for our panel. And so Crystal Garcia Ward is our monitor for today's workshop. So let's give her a round of applause. We're being so helpful. And then Mackenzie, who wrote questions up there, did a fantastic job. And so Crystal will put those up there, and we'll bring them up to the front, and I will sort of randomly choose based on our time and sort of the direction that this, some of the more questions that we haven't addressed. But so thank you, Crystal, for that. And I want to continue to encourage you to continue to reach out to our three panelists beyond today's workshop. And so, you know, if you have any additional questions, and so please make sure to take up their contact information as well, and we'll have folks share their contact information before they leave us today. But I wanted to get to that last question that you were mentioning, and I'm going to combine a couple of questions because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to address some of the questions that you have. But I wanted to start with you, Kelsey, first. I'm curious in terms of some of the lessons that you learned from the barriers that you've encountered. I'm really curious about that. I think there's just a tremendous wealth of experience and knowledge in terms of our panel today. So I'd like to hear some of the things that you've learned from some of the mistakes that you've made, some of the barriers that you've encountered, some of the challenges that you have found with engaging men. there at Texas State University?
I'm trying so to get at all that. So, and I have lots of mistakes to share. When I think about specifically around engagement of men at Texas State, and some of the things that that needs to be done around potentially where we've kind of missed the mark, is that oftentimes you do want to figure out a way that there's a big barrier for men to get involved in, because oftentimes they're not seeing it as benefiting them. And oftentimes we have a lot of this back and forth conversation of, do you frame the conversation of, that's what if your sister was raped, or your mother was raped, what if your daughter was raped, and personally, I've really struggled with that being a tool to engage men, and how we sometimes need to also shift that to kind of talking about more broader messages around, thinking about rape culture and healthy masculinity and that toxic masculinity and what that can do. And so I've definitely struggled, and there's definitely been a lot of challenge just in terms of my interpersonal conversations I've had with individuals about what is the quote unquote right route to go when engaging men in that way. And when we talk about a real barrier, it's that men benefit from living in a society that's patriarchal. And when you're trying to have these conversations, especially as someone who identifies as female and has a lot of femaleness, the other conversation being, who's the best person to put in front of that audience? Who's the best person to advise a group called Men Against Violence? And I think we have to be careful, because we don't want to perpetuate sexism in that men can't hear the message from women. And when you ask women not to be in the space, then what are we really saying about who can actually hear that message and who can't hear that message? And so a lot of my barriers, a lot of my personal challenges and places where I've kind of fallen down is how I frame that conversation and how and who I'm having that conversation with. And so for me, it's been about finding male allies in this space, and really making sure that I'm not offending, and we're having an honest conversation about what does it look like to really engage men at the level that doesn't perpetuate violence in this very specific way. Because even though you have most men who aren't perpetuating the violence, you do have a lot of men who know that it goes on in their different spaces. And the way that we kind of, Jacqueline Friedman uses the term social license, right? And who are we giving this ability to kind of be able to continue to perpetrate over and over again? So for me, it's about finding those male allies. I'm trying to think about, again, just engaging different faculty, some of my barriers and challenges there. Again, I think when it comes to, I am very new at this institution, and so when I think about those barriers, it's also about I didn't do enough of my homework to really find out what was motivating them and what they and honestly, when I get in a room and I have 2 minutes with someone, I need to know what they've been doing for a couple of years, and I need to know why they're doing whatever programming they're doing. I need to know why they're doing that. And sometimes you only have that 10 minutes, and I don't use it well, and I didn't do enough of my homework. That's going to be a meeting that's not potentially very successful. The other thing that I think about a lot and kind of keeps me up at night is really thinking about who is our student population and what are the motivating factors kind of throughout the different populations that we have on our college campus. And I don't have a very good pulse of that yet. And I think that speaks to a lot of the barriers that Men Against Violence sometimes encounters, and just kind of our office in general encounters. honors. We have a very, very good system of doing presentations for incoming freshmen, and we are in freshman orientation, which is very important. But really thinking beyond that, and really thinking about what do all of these different groups of students on this college campus, what does motivate them? Where can we kind of tap into them, and how can we better get that information? Definitely, those are places and spaces in which I think about continuously right now.
Thank you, Kelsey. That's so useful. Kevin?
Biggest barrier is just trying to engage the guys in general. Just trying to find those guys that have the same passion, have the same focus that I have, and it's kind of discouraging. Last fall semester, Women's Studies tried to have an event at the Student Union building for guys to engage the male population. They brought in the same guys that I had on my panel from Women's Protective Services as their speaker, and sadly, I was the only student that showed up. And it's just trying to find ways to engage that male population. That's by far my biggest barrier. After that, just trying to get buy-in from the administration, trying to get buy-in from the Student Government Association, and of course the male students, into fighting just violence against women on campus and sexual assault. And get them to understand that sexual assault on campus is a problem, and it's not just the media, overreaching and exaggerating a exaggerating a situation. I mean, this is a big problem, not just on Texas Tech campus, but on all campuses, it seems. So just engaging the guys and trying to get them to your events, that's by far the biggest barrier I've run into.
And from all of those things, kind of, what lesson did you glean from all of those?
You gotta have food at your events. Yeah, you gotta have food at your events. And not only do you have to have food at your events, just don't make them they have to have meat. They like the meat. They like pizza. Whenever you're doing your presentations, or like we do our next month, we're going to have we're doing an event with the Alien Society, which is a local beer homebrewing society there in Lubbock. We are going to whenever we do events like that, we have like give out candy and stuff like that, but make sure that they're like big hunky things like man candy, you know what I mean? So
That term has a different meaning.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
talking about like big old
That
paydays.
sounds like the perfect
Yeah.
tweet. I appreciate it. I love that.
So,
I mean, I think honestly, if we think about Texas Men, what I loved about the event at UT is that it was a barbecue.
yeah.
And I think there are sort of those things that I think are important to, like, those just very simple things that we, that we just don't put a lot of thought to, but make a real difference to get men into the room. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. Just like start thinking about things that guys like. For instance, like with South Plains Men Challenging Men, not just at Texas Tech, but we came up with the idea of we brew beer. And at our meetings at the end of every month, we brew beer. We brew what we call mead. It's honey wine, just different types of things, just to try to get as many guys involved, just trying to think what guys like. Obviously, we're not going to go to a strip joint or anything like that, but you got to engage them where they're at. Got to engage them on what they really like to do, and that's where you engage them at.
It's an interesting thought. When I think of barriers, the first thing that comes to mind is men who are truly pushing against the tide of their closest friend groups, where they're one of the only people that's thinking like this, where they're witnessing a lot of problematic or harmful behavior, and they have to be that person all the time, on the ground, at the party, at the meeting. I think that can be incredibly isolating for young men who care, discouraging, and eventually it will sever them from your connection because the work is too hard and there's too much at risk for them to continue being that person in the room. And so really what our strategy is to change the culture on campus. And while that is idealistic and lofty, by shifting the norms on campus, it makes it so much easier for those people who are already on the same page as you to actually do the work. So one way that we do that on our campus is through our bystander intervention initiative. That's another program that I'm very closely involved with. I helped found it and I currently co-chair it. So what does it mean to build a culture of care on your campus for everybody? Normalizing bystander intervention so that men can call out other men and have the skills and the tools, just combine those. So that is one piece of it. And the other piece that I really like to highlight is staff capacity. So from a very personal level, this work is really exhausting over time. It can be incredibly disappointing to work with groups of men and see it move like a nudge, right? And you're like, oh, we did so much good work together, and then nothing the next semester or the next year after that. And especially capacity when you're aware of the reality that your entire population of young people on your campus is going to turn over in 4 years, right? So even if we have an excellent year and we're reaching thousands and thousands of students and events are like capital P, primary prevention, we have to do it again next year. Or in the next couple of years. And so I think that will always be a reality of working with college campuses and higher education. And it's mostly an issue for staff capacity and preventing burnout. So how do you build a culture of self-care and collective care for the people who are doing the work, for the members who show up every week, for the people who deeply are passionate about these issues, mostly because they have their own stories of trauma in their life, whether them personally or someone that they love very much. That's one of the lessons I've learned in the student organization, is most people are there because this is their healing work. They're there because they need to be in conversation with other people who get it. And even if it's hard, even if it's challenging, it's part of their process of becoming whole people and trusting that there's goodness in the world after an experience of violence, either personally or in their community or family. So I don't know the answers to that. Maybe that can be one of our group conversations, is how do you keep it up? So even when you find something good that seems to be working, sustaining that, I think, is always going to be a challenge in this field.
So I'm going to ask Crystal to pass out the evaluations, as well as a copy of Voicemail magazine, which is a fantastic national quarterly publication that addresses this issue of masculinity that Aaron was talking about. So I hope you find it useful in your work, and if you're interested in the magazine, I would encourage you to get a subscription or a bulk subscription for your college or university or organization or institution. And so please reach out to the editor and tell them I told you to do that. We have like 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to address a couple questions that I think we haven't touched on. I think that are critical sort of conversations. And so if you could complete the evaluation and return that to Crystal at the end. But the first one, and I'm gonna pose both of them, and you can decide either combining your answer to these two questions, because I feel like they relate to each other. The first one is, how does your work reflect intersections and marginalized students? So when we think about, just the identity, like the multiple identities of students on colleges and universities around Texas, how does your work reflect and address like those particular students that are marginalized, either in the minority or who just come from marginalized communities around the state of Texas? And then the next question I think that's related is that you then on the other hand have very conservative schools, colleges and universities in conservative parts of the state that unfortunately block a lot of activities in terms of implementation. And so the work doesn't move anywhere, and so I'm curious if you have thoughts about one or the other. That's fine if you want to take that on. So how do you get conservative colleges and universities to even address this issue programmatically? or to put resources towards these, towards our primary prevention efforts with men on campus. So you can take either one of those questions or both. So we'll start with you, Kelsey.
So we only have 8 minutes, so I'll be quick. In terms of trying to make sure that we're always being inclusive and speaking to kind of multiple people's identities and people who come from marginalized communities, it's definitely something that is never done and is always ongoing. Something that I think is really important, specifically with Men Against Violence, is who we ask to come and speak. Not only of who's in the membership and who's present in that space, but who is talking to them and what information are they receiving. So when we are doing a lot of our meetings are bringing in educational speakers and doing an educational component and making sure that we're hitting on what does the trans community experience at Texas State and how is that relevant to the work that we do with interpersonal violence, and how are we making sure that we are correlating those experiences and hearing their voice and translating that into a way that is equitable for that community. We have Feminists United, which is a student organization, which is a very activist student organization here at Texas State that does, again, work that we do with them. We're able, because of their history and their level of activism, they do work that is a little different than ours. And we have them come in and we usually have kind of a dialogue back and forth on what their experiences have been. And they often look a little different because ours is male. Our organization is male heavy in membership. And so constantly getting perspectives from people from those marginalized communities is super important. And then how are we translating that into our content and also giving those presentations and is that inclusive. And so that's extremely important as well, that you're one very monolithic talking about these issues. That's extremely important. So that's extremely important. What was the second question?
No, it's a good one. Let's move on to somebody else, Kelsey, but I appreciate your, because I think you addressed that question really well. Erin?
Yeah, for me, thinking about marginalized identities has to be the first question. And that, people have heard the term having to center people, but I think really doing that from the onset. It definitely is about representation. I echo those sentiments Kelsey is talking about, of who's leading the conversation, who's organizing the conversation. So I'll show you some examples of what we've done on our campus. Those faculty members really leading those efforts and making sure that the faculty members are diverse to start with really was paramount. And that we were really thinking about intersectionality as we built the principles of the project, the definition of healthy masculinities on our campus, and then the events that came out of that. So having it not be an afterthought, right? Not being like, oh my God, there's no men of color in this space, right? That's not something that I will ever want to have happen, because we've been thinking about that from the very beginning, about how is this relevant for Black men on our campus? How is this relevant for Latino men on our campus? Relevant for Muslim men on our campus? And then building campaigns and events around that. So getting specific and really tailoring events for specific populations, and then going from there. So we had one event in particular by a faculty member released a book on incest in Mexican American families. So really talking about Mexican culture, Mexican relationships of family and expectations there. So really specific content and information and qualitative-based research, not just kind of talking about it broadly, right, but getting as specific as possible. And the other side, we had another event co-sponsored with our African diaspora studies, and one of our faculty members who's in the Department of Advertising, who brought in a filmmaker called Black Men Dream. So a documentary specifically Black men speaking about their experiences, their fears, worries, hopes, and dreams. And so again, that specificity really matters. And I think it shows students that it's not lip service. that it's really about people who've actually had these experiences, who are part of these communities, who are leading the conversation. I am very aware that my whiteness impacts every conversation that I have around violence and masculinity. And so being the person who's not at the microphone is sometimes the best technique for making sure that your events are relevant.
So Kenneth, one of the reasons I thought about you in terms of being on the panel is because you are from Lubbock, and I think our ideas about rural communities are that they are conservative. That might not always be true here in Texas. But I wanted just to ask you specifically if you could address this question about conservative colleges and universities based on you mentioned some of the universities in the area are faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you sort of overcome that? Like, is there a willingness to engage in dialogue with you and allow students to do this work on campus?
You just got to get buy-in. You have to have from there. If the administration realizes that this is something that the students want, they will be more than happy to oblige them, and they will be more willing to support you in what you do. The faculty also, if the faculty want this to happen, there's going to be a lot more dialogue there. That's what I've been trying to do is because we are in a very, very conservative campus, and just trying to get the message out there. And you got to go through the process. I mean, you got to plan. Like with if we want to do anything with the food, I really like your hot dog idea. That would be awesome. But with us, I mean, there are just so many different forms that we have to fill out. So I mean, you have to plan maybe a semester ahead of time. Yeah, you have to plan out ahead. You have to find your allies. You have to engage them, and then from there you can map out what you're going to do and how you plan on doing this. And that's what I've been doing for this last White Ribbon campaign. I started planning it back in September, and we were able to unveil it in January. So just make sure you map it out. Make sure you know exactly what you're going to do, because they're going to ask you questions before you do it, and you have to have a really good answer for them on these conservative campuses.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our time is up, and there's another group that's coming in here at 10:15. So I also want to make sure that you have an opportunity to take a break and get to your next workshop. But I want to, if you could join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists. On behalf of TAASA and the Mobilizing Men's Task Force that is beginning a new initiative around engaging college-age men. One of the things I failed to mention at the beginning of today's panel is that this is part of our sort of efforts to address this issue. I wanted to invite the panelists if they have the time, because I know they're each very busy. But on the Google Air event page, there's a place to ask questions. And so if you have additional questions that you feel like afterthought and that you have for them, that you'd like to post there, and then if they have an opportunity, they can respond. I also want to encourage you to share the recording with your colleagues, your peers. If you're part of an organization or institution, please share this recording with folks. It will be available immediately after today's panel. And again, thank you so much. And they are available. Please come up. Make sure Crystal will also pass out the voicemails magazine. So make sure pick up a copy of that. So it's one less thing I have to take back to Austin. But please come up. Erin has a lot of information about Voices Against Violence and their initiatives, and feel free to stick around for the next 15 minutes, and they're going to keep us out at 10:15. So thank you again, Kelsey. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming in and participating on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later, Kelsey.
Thank you, Emiliano.